We have been going through the book of Daniel, and we have gone through the first four chapters, and we'll be going on to chapter five today. There are two more chapters which are non-prophetic in a way, but they are prophetic in a secondary sense. As we pointed out, they are prophetic in that they are types. You could call them parables. They are representations of future events. And it's one of the remarkable things about the book of Daniel that even though we say there are about four prophetic passages and there are about six historical chapters, it's not really so because the entire book is prophetic, but just that some of the prophecies are based on actual experiences that people had. There are prophecies in that they are striking representations of future events. So they are what we call types, uh, even stronger than types in some cases, even stronger than types. They are prophecies that had a previous fulfillment to be fulfilled on a wider scale in the future. So the entire book is one of those books that you have to say it was designed by God. The entire, not just the stories told in it, but the shape of the book, the sequence of these events, everything was designed and ordained to be that way by God. You know, there are some things like this in the Bible that you find the New Testament writers talk about them, and sometimes they make you wonder. For example, the sequence of events that happened in the life of Abraham. He had Sarah, but first of all, he had Hagar, and there was an illegitimate child. Then he had Sarah and the legitimate child, and then it turned out that they had to turn out Hagar and the other child. And Paul takes that in Galatians chapter 4, and he says the whole thing was designed, the whole story was designed to teach about the old and the new covenant. Then we have the case of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the priest of the Most High God. Abraham paid tithe to him. And Paul goes and takes that story. And it's like the entire thing was designed by God. There's no record of his father, his mother. There's no record of his life ending. His name means king of righteousness. The actual location of his ministry was the king of Salem, the king of peace. And Paul goes on to say that this entire thing, the man's life, his name, his ministry, the record itself in the Bible was designed by God. God did not allow the record of Melchizedek's father or mother to be put in the scripture because he intended it to be a representation of Jesus Christ, of who Jesus was. So, you know, when you think of things like this, it makes you understand more fully that the Bible is an inspired book. Even though, you know, I don't know if all of us agree on this, but I don't believe it is verbally inspired in the sense that God dictated exactly what word was to be there in every situation. But I think you can, when you read it, you understand that even the way it is written, the place of the different books and the different chapters, God oversaw all of this. There was a sovereign hand overseeing the Bible itself, the compilation of it and everything. Sometimes when people say, you know, man wrote the Bible, and when they say, do you know that it was the Catholic people who determined which books should be in the canon, which books should go into the Bible? All of that is true, and yet to look at it in this way is to belittle the meaning of inspiration. Because when we say inspiration, we don't mean that just that God decided what should go there, but we mean that God is sovereign. God has been overseeing. It's like a contractor on a job. He doesn't do the work, but he oversees. And when he oversees the work, the design and the shape of the job is his responsibility. You have individuals who work on different parts of the project, and some of them might do a little bad job. One part of it might be out of place, but the overall picture, it's designed by somebody, and somebody oversees it. So you can say it's the work of this contractor or this architect, even though other people might have been used in putting the pieces together. I like to think of the Bible in this way because it helps me to understand why it's possible for there to be minor glitches in the scripture, and yet we can say it is an inspired book, divinely inspired. You know, you have some little minor things like one place in Chronicles, it says something like there were 6,000 people, and the same exact passage, the same exact record in Kings, it says there were 600. So this is very easily recognized to be the mistake of a scribe. Little things like that in the Bible, and anybody who is sensible understands that this is not something you use to negate the inspiration of the book, because we're not talking about, as I said, verbal inspiration. We're talking about a divine hand overseeing and making sure that the story gets across. The points that are important are not veiled, are not hidden, are not deceptive. So I'm just saying this because I'm just thinking of it as we think of the book of Daniel, a book that is clearly designed to be this way by God. Go ahead, Sister Diane.
I'm happy you're touching on this idea about the Bible, because before we left the other meeting, for some reason this question came into my mind, and that is, when was the New Testament scriptures written and put together, and how long did the New Testament church use the Torah before they had what we now know the New Testament? You know, some people don't even consider the New Testament scriptures because of the fact that the Old Testament was called scripture and it didn't exist. So when did that come about, and how is it that if they knew they were under the New Testament and they still had the Torah, is that why they then kept feasts for so long? Because of that situation. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure. And just I mean, to give a kind of imprecise answer to the question, we know that Peter refers to the writings of Paul as scripture. Peter says that the Apostle Paul has written some things that are hard to be understood, which those who are unlearned and ignorant twist as they twist the other scriptures. He refers to the writings of Paul as scriptures. He puts it on the same level as the rest of scripture. So what we can understand, you know, Peter says that holy men of God in old times spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So it's easy for us to understand that if these people recognize that the men of their generation were being moved by the same Holy Spirit, what rationale would they have for not categorizing their works as also scripture? So even during the time of the New Testament, very early in the Christian church, they came to recognize the value of writings like, you know, the Apostle Paul has so many of them. It's true that the actual compilation of these documents didn't happen until later on. I'm not sure exactly how much later, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years afterwards, they got together all of these and they decided what should be regarded as scripture, because a problem arose because, you know, they had a whole lot of different writings that came from people who, some of them were genuine apostles, some of them were not, some of them were stories of people who might have lived at the time. They had the Gospel of Barnabas, I believe. There are quite a number of books that do not appear in the New Testament, but they were written round about that time, that early period. And they had a problem later on determining when they decided to put these writings together. And at the time when it was happening, it was the early church that was doing it. Now, people will say, the Catholics will claim that this was the Catholic Church. And I'm going to tell you how that goes, because at this time, there was only one Christian church, and it was the Christian Church. The Catholic Church claims that they are this same Christian church. So of course they will claim that these early compilers of the scripture were Catholics. And if you look at the organizational structure of the Christian church, they would have a point. What do we believe about it? I mean, we who are not Catholics, what we believe is that You identify the church of God by looking at the place where truth exists. So what we believe is that the organized structure of the Christian church, it went into the path of apostasy and became the Roman Catholic institution, the organized structure. So if you view the church as an organized structure, you will say that the Catholic Church is the true church and was a true church from the beginning, because organizationally, if you follow the channel of organization, you end up with Catholicism. But if you follow the path of consistent truth, you're not going to end up with Catholicism. You're going to end up with offshoot groups that broke away from that organized structure. And the history of those offshoot groups has been a history of continual breaking away. You have never had the truth of God in one body consistently from the time of the apostles until today. It has been a constant breaking away, even to our present offshoot status here for those of us who are in this group. So that has been the history of it. Sister Diane, you wanted to say something else?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so the problem is that when they were putting together these books, they had to decide which of these books should we include, because some of them appear to be fanciful, almost like fairy tales. One of them tells the story of Jesus when he was a little boy, and he was down by the river making birds out of clay. And his mother came and called to him, and he just waved his hands at these birds made out of dirt, and they flew away, even as a little boy. So the people who were thinking of what to put together, which books were worthy to go together to tell the story of Jesus, they excluded some of these books that were fanciful. That's the best way we could say. They were fanciful. And this was the challenge that people had. What is to be included and what is not. I have looked at some of these books, and I'm perfectly happy that they were not included in Scripture. Even in the Old Testament, there was a book called Tobit, and it was in the Apocrypha. It was a part of what people sometimes refer to as, I mean, in Jamaica they kind of refer to it as the Maccabee version, but it's really just books that are not included in the Christian canon. And in Tobit it tells you that you can get rid of demons by getting a fish liver and roasting it. Get a fish liver and roast it, and this fish liver is good for getting rid of demons, which is pure, stupid superstition. Something like that should have no place in the Bible. And rightfully, it's still in the Catholic Jerusalem Bible version, but Protestants removed it because, and as I said, I believe that the architect behind all of it was God. I don't care who was responsible for compiling the Scripture. If we believe as Christians in the sovereignty of God and that God is the overseer of the whole world, then I trust this. I trust this. And when I go to the Bible with this kind of attitude, I find great reason for trusting it. The harmony in the Scriptures, once you begin to understand it, it is amazing. I look at the Bible and I think about the structure of DNA. Anytime you want to blow your mind, you go study DNA. But I look at the structure of DNA. I look at the way the human body is made up. The way the human body is made up, even just the study of biology, it blows your mind. You know, how everything, you have the nerves, you have the muscles, you have the cells, everything in place, a self-replicating, amazing system. No device of any creature could ever create something like this. Impossible. And when you look at the Bible and you begin to understand it, when you begin to put the pieces together, that's the kind of amazement that hits you. You begin to see the divine hand, the intricacy, the beauty, the perfection of it. And it builds your faith because I don't understand everything. There's still a great deal that I need to understand. But what you see so far, it engenders great confidence because you can see, as the picture becomes more clear, you can see an amazing hand directing the putting together of this book. And it's not a book, it's a collection of 40 books, right? It's a collection of 40 books, and that's why it's even more amazing. Different people writing, and it's a library really rather than a book. Right, Sister Di?
All right, so while the early church existed, you're saying it took 100 or more years to compile the New Testament. So as they were writing letters to the believers, that wasn't something everybody got. If you wrote a letter to Corinth, that's what the Corinthians got. It didn't become known to everybody else until it was put into the book. So what I'm asking is, the whole time the Christian church was formed, it was using the Old Covenant, the Torah.
Yeah, okay, yes, right. They were using the Old Testament scriptures, and that was the Bible for them. And if you look at, for example, books like the book of Hebrews, and if you look at the sermons that the apostles preached in the book of Acts, Peter and Paul, they are heavily laced with Old Testament scriptures. And if you even look at the book of Matthew, for example, it's constantly quoting from the Old Testament, because the challenge they had was much more difficult than our challenge. Their challenge was to use the Old Testament to prove that Jesus was Christ. They had to use the Old Testament to prove that the new covenant was God, was Christ in you. And so there were a lot of verses that we would consider obscure. Maybe we would even consider them inconclusive. But they quoted these verses freely, and they interpreted them in such a way that you could see that these were talking about Christ and his ministry and the new covenant. So yeah, that was the Bible that they had, and it was the one that they taught from for at least the first 100 years. But of course, you see Paul writing a letter, and to add to this, of course, they had the apostles, they had living apostles. These people traveled everywhere. And when Paul wrote a letter, he says, read this in to the brethren at Laodicea as well. Read this in such and such a place, or read the epistle to so and so. So Paul himself, while he was alive, he encouraged them to pass his letters around, because the gospel was in these letters, and he didn't want to have to replicate it. I mean, today, even if we had inspiration of that same nature, it's much easier, because you put up a sermon on YouTube and everybody goes and they get the same message. You don't have to preach it 50 times over. But you put it there and then everybody has it. And it was kind of like what they were doing. They didn't have YouTube, so they made sure you shared it so and so, you shared it so and so, and that's how it worked. Anyway, so the book of Daniel, and Daniel chapter 5 is where we are today. And what we looked at last week was the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar, and it remains one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because when you talk about the grace of God and the love of God for people, Nebuchadnezzar is one of those. Hold on, let me just get rid of this thing that always gets in the way. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar is one of those outstanding examples that comes to mind, because he really is somebody that you could say went from the gutter to glory. Not in terms of this world, not in terms of how we see the world. In the world, he was a great man, but in spiritual things, he was in the gutter. And he went from the gutter to glory. God took him step by step. It's one of those stories in the Bible where you can see point by point God's grace and mercy towards somebody that you would have thought was completely undeserving. And it is a lesson that we can learn from. Now, the next chapter that we come upon is many years later, many decades later, because we come upon Belshazzar, who is actually the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. By this time, Nebuchadnezzar is long dead and gone. Daniel has been somewhere in the background now, because it's a strange thing that Nebuchadnezzar was an unusual king, and he elevated Daniel to a high place in Babylon. But remember that from the beginning, Nebuchadnezzar's advisors resented the fact that these aliens and strangers were given this prominent place in the kingdom. It's kind of like America should get somebody from Saudi Arabia and make general of the American army. You can imagine, even when uh, Barack Obama became president, one of the things that they constantly were harping on and trying to use against him was they said he was not born in America, right? They tried to use that. So the idea of a native born for important positions is very, there's this nationalism that is very strong, and you can imagine in heathen nations it would have been very strong. So I can imagine that as soon as Nebuchadnezzar died, the next king, Nebuchadnezzar's son, demoted Daniel. Why? Because there would have been the Babylonian lords would have been pressing the matter. They would not have let up at all. And so it would not have been long before they would have demoted Daniel, removed him, and put a proper Babylonian in the prime minister's position. So by the time by the time Belshazzar came along, Daniel had been forgotten. They didn't even know about Daniel, most of the people. And as we read through the story, we're going to see that this is brought out clearly. So we begin with the reign of Belshazzar. At some point, in fact, this is the last night of his reign. It says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Now you might wonder, why does he do this? I mean, there's no explaining the lunacy and the madness of people. But I mean, I think it's a way of, many people believe that the way to exalt themselves is to put down somebody else. Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar is elevating himself. He's glorifying himself. They're having a great feast. Some people believe it might have been the Feast of Tammuz. I don't know. Some people believe it was Christmas. I don't know. But anyway, he's having this great feast, and a thought strikes into his befuddled mind. He's drunk, and the thought comes into his mind. What better way to show my greatness? What better way to entertain my people than to send for the sacred vessels of these enslaved Hebrews, vessels that have some divine connotation, and drink from them. He's not going to drink from gold or silver simply because gold and silver was in abundance, but to drink from vessels dedicated to the gods. That is what he probably had in his mind. Nebuchadnezzar at least had been far more respectful even in his perverted days. But a lot of times you have young people who are put into positions that they are not qualified to control, to deal with. You remember the son of Solomon. I mean, it's nice to be young, but the only unfortunate thing is that many times stupidity accompanies youth, and you don't learn until you really get old enough. By the time you get old enough to be wise, you are too old to benefit from it. Sometimes it happens that way. But if you remember, Solomon's son Rehoboam, stupid son. The people said, your father taxed us. Can you relax your taxes? Solomon's son Rehoboam went and asked his young advisors what to do. First of all, he asked the old men, and they said, look here, relax the taxes, and the people will love you. No, he went and asked his young advisors, and they said, look here, you have to be strong, you have to be firm. These people need a firm hand. Tell them your father beat them with whips, and you will beat them with scorpions. Tell them your little finger is going to be thicker than your father's thigh. And this stupid young fellow went and told the people that he nearly lost the kingdom. I mean, he only was able to hang on to the nation of Judah, the tribe of Judah, because God was merciful for David's sake. But they turned against him, almost killed him. Anyway, I am just emphasizing that you know age is not always wise, but experience really does teach wisdom, and Belshazzar was lacking in it. So they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives and his concubines drank in them. For what reason, you ask, under heaven? Just pure, stupid, intoxicated, inebriated desire for self exaltation. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone. And it may be just coincidence, but it's an interesting little side note that they praise. Six gods are mentioned: gold, silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone. Because I just mentioned that because they say six is always connected with Babylon, and several times it comes out. I think also the music that they played at the dedication of the image. I think there were six. I'm not sure. I won't swear for that, but they worship six elements are mentioned here, that they drank their wine and they praised these gods. I mean, this is an insult to Jehovah. It's not just an exaltation of Belshazzar, it's an insult to Jehovah. You go for his vessels, you take them and you drink from them, and you are praising the anti-gods. You are praising the contrary gods. What are you doing to Jehovah? You are spitting in his face. You are saying to him, you are helpless and impotent. We do whatever we want. We step on you. We blaspheme. We are sacrilegious, and we are elevating other gods while we desecrate your implements. So it's a deliberate act of defiance of God. And I want you to remember that in everything we are studying in the book of Daniel here, we are looking at a type, a microcosm of elements that will exist in the last days. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Many times I wonder, why is it
Brother
that God
David,
was. Yes, Sister Heather.
it's Sanya.
Okay, sorry, Sanya. Go ahead.
I was listening to someone talking about this chapter, and they were supposing that the feast that they had might have been not just to what you call it now, not just to the gods that were written there, but they were actually doing human sacrifices probably. And what they were drinking from the vessels were not just wine, but I guess wine mixed with blood or some foolishness like that. And the person was using like other examples, um, not necessarily in the Bible itself, but historically, to say that is why God was this upset about them using the vessels.
Okay. As you said, it's somebody speculating, and it sounds fanciful to me, and I'll tell you why. Because the Bible, if you read the books of Kings and Chronicles, it emphasizes the nations that did human sacrifice, and it mentions the cruelty of Babylon, but it does not mention human sacrifice in connection with Babylon. It mentions the god of the Zidonians and those who made their children to pass through the fire, and but it doesn't mention it in connection with Babylon. That's one of the things. And secondly, a little further down in this chapter, you will see where Daniel tells the king precisely why God sent him this message, and it does not mention human sacrifice. So I think probably, people can speculate and come up with all kinds of things, but looking at the internal evidence from the passage itself, I would tend to disagree. Anyway, so it says, what I wonder about sometimes when I see things like this, I wonder, and people say it all the time, why has God changed? I mean, he used to do these things. It seems like so many times in the Old Testament, God appeared in significant ways at significant moments in history. If you look back at the history of the planet since Jesus came, there are not too many instances where you see this miraculous intervention of God. And when you look at it, in my mind, God's way of operating in relation to humanity has undergone a change, and I believe it is in keeping with the new covenant. In the time of darkness, in the time of the darkness of nations, when God was dealing with people on a national basis, their religion was physical. The people that God claimed as his were physical. The operations of God were in the physical realm. The old covenant is a covenant of the physical. It's about worldly things. And in the physical realm, God demonstrated his presence in physical ways. Even although faith was emphasized in the time of the old covenant, but there is a very physical presence of God, and he physically demonstrates his physical greatness above every other God and his ability to preserve his physical people. So you have this constant intervention of God in a physical way, or in a material way, if I may put it that way. But in the new covenant is very different. It's not about physical people or physical exaltation of God's people. Instead of overcoming their enemies, they are slaughtered. They are like sheep to the slaughter. They are martyred. It's almost like God doesn't step in to defend them anymore. But this is not the point. The point is that since the time of the new covenant, the terms of God's relationship with his people are a little different, because the emphasis is on spiritual qualities. And sometimes death itself is what brings out these qualities. Sometimes what seems to be defeat and destruction is really the greatest element of glory in the context of the new covenant. And so we find God physically manifesting himself not as often, but you find a spiritual representation of God, the spiritual power of God being expressed in purity and holiness, and people who cannot be defeated. You can destroy their lives, but you cannot destroy their spirit. This is emphasized more in the new covenant. I just said that in passing, because you look at a thing like this and you think of the number of people. You think of the number of people who blaspheme God today, people in high places, and you think how many of them need a hand writing on the wall. This is what you would say and what I would say. God needs to intervene and bring these people down like he did Belshazzar. But I think it has to do with the difference between the old and the new covenant. Something we could probably look at more closely at some time, but I just wanted to say that briefly in passing. So a hand appears on the wall, and you can imagine, I mean, I can just put myself in the place of Belshazzar, and I know he is shocked out of his drunken state. Instantly his mind is clear. A hand against the wall. I tell you, I grew up, I used to live in a part of Jamaica where they have a lot of it used to be a place where in that part of Jamaica they have a lot of, they had cane fields, sugar cane plantations, and it used to be a place where, of slaves, and there's a lot of stories. And people always like to talk about, they like to tell what you call in Jamaica duppy stories, which is ghost stories. But I'll tell you, they can make the hair stand on your head. But I mean, even in my family, there were two unusual experiences. We used to live in an apartment building, an old wooden place, and one day we were in our place and we heard a commotion and a noise and bad words up at the apartment a little above us. When everybody ran to see, the man was standing there in his room shaking, and he said, I never knew Duppy could be so barefaced. I didn't know ghosts could be so barefaced." Because he was standing in his room and he heard somebody knock at the door. And he went to the door and opened it. Nobody was there. And when he turned around, there was a woman standing in the room. And in Jamaica, they think that when you face ghosts, you curse bad words. They can't stand in the face of bad words. So this man let off a volley of bad words at the top of his voice. So that was the noise we heard. But right at that place, one of my brothers actually, outside of the apartment, there was a kind of landing. You came down from the next level, and then there was a kind of landing where you step down. Then there was another set of steps going down. And one of my youngest brother at the time was walking on this landing, and he just saw 2 feet, two black feet just walk across the landing and disappear. And he couldn't speak. He lost his voice. He lost the ability to move. And then we saw him dash inside. When he said, "What is it? What is it?" He couldn't speak for a while. And then eventually came out. He saw these 2 black feet. And, we were scared to go to walk alone for a while after that. But I just tell this because I can imagine something like this is happening to Belshazzar. He doesn't see 2 black feet. He sees a hand appear without a body, and the hand is writing on the wall. There comes a time in your life when you know you are in the presence of something supernatural. And I will tell you, no matter how calm and collected you are, in that moment, you lose your nerve. When Daniel saw a heavenly being, he fell on his face and he lost all his strength. It happened to Daniel. Every time in the Bible that somebody is in the presence of a supernatural being, he loses all his strength. Because that's the effect it has on you when you encounter something that you know is not of this world. So it says, then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. We know what that means, right? His knees started to knock together. His knees were shaking like little twigs in the wind. And I think part of the problem too is that the king, he is aware that he's doing something that is blasphemous. He's aware that he's doing something. It's like when we were children, and we had a tank. We had a tank in the yard. They build these tanks out of concrete. They go down into the ground, and then we collect rainwater. And the place where we lived, there was a bit of mesh across the top of the tank. And my brothers and I, in daring moments, would run across the top of the tank. We couldn't swim. We never knew the strength of this mesh, but we would run across this mesh. And if I had ever seen any of my children doing something like that, I would have warmed their bottom properly. But my parents never saw. But when we ran across, we felt this thrill, like we did something really daring. And that's what the king is doing. You hope nobody saw you. And that is what the king is doing. He puts on a brave face. He's running across the mesh. He's drinking out of the vessels, but he's kind of scared, because everybody knows that there's something about the God of the Hebrews. And it's partly the reason why he has taken out his vessels and drunk in them, because he is showing the greatness of himself and the gods of Babylon, that he can dare to do this. So when the hand appears against the wall, in that instant, all his unspoken, his subdued fears jump to the surface, and his knees start to knock against each other, because he's aware. In his conscience, he knows that he has crossed the line.
Hey, let me ask you a question.
Sure, Brother Tony.
Now, didn't he knew what happened to his grandfather, right? So he knew about the God of the Hebrews, but he
Yes,
chose to defile him anyway, right?
yes, he did. That's what Daniel said. That's what Daniel told him. So you're quite right, Brother Tony. So he knew from the moment he did this that he was being very daring. He was taking a step that was dangerous, to say the very least, right? But how do you elevate yourself except to do something that shows that you are bigger than your
Right.
circumstances?
Right.
That's what he's trying to do, and
Right.
it's firing.
Do you think these hands was the hand of Christ, and this was something like a prophecy for the wicked in the end times?
I mean, clearly the hand was. I mean, I am pretty persuaded that the hand was the hand of an angel. But the writing itself, when we come to it, I will comment on it because it is a prophecy in a way, and I don't think it's a direct prophecy, but it's a prophecy in a secondary sense, and I'll explain when I come from what was actually written. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, of course, because he has nobody else. Daniel has been demoted long ago, and these are probably the very people who caused Daniel to be demoted, and these are the very people who probably encouraged the king in his blasphemy. So he sends for them, and the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. So promises of greatness, promises of promotion, and it's kind of interesting because it turns out that this promotion was basically valueless, and I'll explain why. The thing is, I suppose Belshazzar didn't expect when he was offering this promotion, he didn't know how useless it would be, because at that very moment the Medes and the Persians were camping at the gates of Babylon. Cyrus and Darius, at the head of the Medo-Persian army, was camped at that very moment. Babylon was under siege, but of course nobody could overthrow Babylon. That was their belief, because Babylon had these walls. I understand, I forget how tall they were, but they were so broad that I am told that 3 chariots could drive side by side on the top of these walls. So there were huge walls, and they completely surrounded the entire city of Babylon. Nobody could break through those walls. No engine of those days, no device could break down the walls of Babylon. And they had food to last them for years, and they had water to last them forever, because the Euphrates River ran under the walls of Babylon. And in case anybody was thinking of traveling into the city by means of the river, every night the streets that crossed the river, they had walls along the banks of the river on the inside, and then they had gates in these walls that would be closed at night to make sure that even if you got into the riverbed, you couldn't get into the city, because you had the walls where the streets actually crossed over the river, where you had bridges. So it was impregnable. So he never really gave serious thought to anything serious happening, although the army of the Medes and the Persians was camped there. So he thought, this is one little crisis and we'll overcome this, because after all, this is Babylon. And so he was offering the person who could tell him the writing, who could read it, to give them the position of the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. It's in a language, I'm not sure which language it was, I'm not sure. But clearly it was not a language that, it might not even have been an earthly language. I don't know. I'd have to do some more research on it. I don't know if anybody can come up with any idea that there was some earthly language that it was related to, but the only person, nobody there, none of those men with all their learning and their exposure in the world knew how to read it. So I don't think it was a normal human language. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled. Of course he was troubled. Okay, something like this happens, the hand disappears, but the writing is there on the wall, emblazoned like in letters of fire. It's staring him in the face, and he's looking at it, and it won't move. Everybody's coming and looking at this writing. Was he imagining it? Was he having a nightmare? Here are the people, and they are seeing the same thing. The writing is there. So of course he will move heaven and earth to discover what it is saying. So the king was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished, or they were amazed. Now the queen, and when it says the queen here, we are referring to the king's mother, not the king's wife. This is an older lady who is far wiser than her stupid son, and who is more familiar with events from the past. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. She's saying, King, don't be worried about this, right? There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. This was the way Nebuchadnezzar described Daniel. Now, it's amazing that either Belshazzar is completely ignorant of Daniel, or he completely ignores Daniel. And the queen is reminding him, the queen is saying to him, have you forgotten that there's somebody here? Either she's giving him as brand new information, but it's hard to believe that it's brand new information based on what Daniel says afterwards. It seems to me that Belshazzar has just turned away so completely from the ways of his grandfather that he has forgotten about Daniel. He has wiped him out of his memory, and in this moment of crisis, it just never occurs to him that there might be somebody else here who can help. So the queen goes on. I think we would call her the queen mother. And in the days of thy father, your grandfather, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and soothsayers. She's reminding him of what he should know. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences and the dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So this lady was perfectly familiar with the spirit that was in Daniel, the abilities of Daniel, the credentials of Daniel, and the potential in Daniel to satisfy the king's understanding, the king's desire for knowledge. And I can't believe that she was the only person who knew this. I am leaning to the idea that this was a deliberate overlooking of Daniel, because they had forgotten about Daniel. In the crisis of the moment, you turn to the things that you're most familiar with. And I think she's more stirring up his memory, because we're talking about not just maybe 1 or 2 years, we're talking about decades, maybe like 30 years ago. If I think back to 30 years and I ask myself, who was the Minister of Finance in Jamaica 30 years ago? I really can't answer the question. If you ask me who used to read the news on the television 30 years ago, I can't answer the question. You know, even people who were probably quite famous at the time, I don't even remember the names of some of them. You know, so anyway, I'm just kind of making, and especially if they made an attempt to suppress Daniel, cut him out of all public affairs and all influence of in the affairs of Babylon, he would have gone out of memory. So the queen is coming and she's saying, do you know that this little old man is still alive, and this man is still, he still has this knowledge? So anyway, it says, then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? All right, So he has heard of Daniel, but he's saying, are you that Daniel? In other words, it completely was lost on him that Daniel was still alive. They shunted Daniel to some remote corner of the place where nobody had anything to do with him or cared about Daniel anymore. And so even the king didn't even know that Daniel was still alive, it seems. So Daniel comes in as a novelty. The king is kind of, are you that same Daniel who my father, my grandfather brought out from among the Jews? And then in a kind of wonderment, he says, I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. One of the things that the Bible does, it repeats everything in the same kind of detail. But I mean, it's good because each time we read the second time, the third time, sometimes the details become more firmly fixed in our minds. And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now, if thou canst read the writing and make it known to me, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. All right, now he's ready to elevate Daniel again. Daniel used to be second ruler. Now he wants to make Daniel third ruler. And it may be because I'm not sure if the person who was second ruler was some other family member. It might have been that he was reigning jointly with his father or something of the sort. I don't want to say that because I'm not sure. But anyway, Daniel was offered position of third ruler. And Daniel might have said, I'll have you know I was once second ruler, and this doesn't appeal to me at all. Anyway, he's promising Daniel promotion, dressing him up in red garments, and I think that is an insignia of royalty, and it's like giving you a degree and elevating you to a high place. Put a chain of gold around your neck and make you third ruler. And like Daniel always says, and like the children of God always say, children of God always have the same attitude. Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. All right. People of God, they don't exercise the gifts of God for money or for profit. Somebody needs to go and say this to the American healers and the American televangelists. My apologies to those up here in the room who have to be associated with these people by nationality. But when you look at these greedy, money hungry people, I remember when Oral Roberts said that God said he needed to raise 10 million or God was going to kill him. You know, they will heal you if you give a proper donation, or this kind of charlatanry. God's true servants have nothing to do with that kind of satanic attitude. So Daniel simply says, look here, keep your gifts and give your rewards to somebody else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing unto the king and make known to him the interpretation. All right, so he's not interested in benefits or earthly reward. Nebuchadnezzar can't make him any, Belshazzar cannot make him any better or any worse. He belongs to God, and God's promotion is what he's after. Like we saw this morning, do things for God's sake and God's sake alone. Don't do things to please people, and this is the way your faith grows. He says,
Okay.
"O thou king." Yes.
So I do have a little question here. Why is it that Daniel's attitude towards Belteshazzar and his rewards somewhat different from the rewards that was offered him by Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar made him a ruler, and he didn't refuse that.
I'll say a couple of things. Number one, Nebuchadnezzar was somebody that Daniel obviously respected. And you're going to see that he doesn't have a great deal of respect for Belshazzar, even although he's speaking to him politely, but he doesn't respect him. And that's first of all. Secondly, Daniel had never been before ruler of Babylon until Nebuchadnezzar gave him the position. Daniel never asked for it. Nebuchadnezzar did it, and he accepted it. He also asked him to make Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also give them positions. But remember, this is many years later. Daniel has been there and done that. He has been in that position, and what did he find? I mean, I guess like Solomon, he found out that vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It never helped me to be there. It never made me a better person. It never made me worse. I don't need that kind of stress in my older years. So I would think that too, because I would say the same thing for myself, right? If the government came to me and wanted to make me minister of this or that, I would say, please, no, give somebody else. I don't want that stress on my head. What are you going to do? Pay me money to compensate for the stress you are putting on me? No, give it to somebody else. And I think Daniel was like that. He just wanted to be left alone to enjoy his later years in peace. Don't give me any position. Don't put me up in the limelight. I've been there, I've done that, and there's nothing to it. It's just vanity. And he's older and he's wiser and he knows what is it. So I'm just imagining that these are some of the.
All right. Uh,
David.
I'm not finished yet. So, Brother David, don't you think that at this point, when Daniel is about to give him the interpretation, Daniel, of course, knew what was going to happen to the kingdom. So,
Absolutely.
therefore, it never make any sense for him to even try to accept anything from him at this point either.
That too, of course. Yes, Brother Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was going to say something pretty close to what Ian just said. Yeah,
Okay.
because I was just thinking that Daniel knew that his offering of this reward, if he were to accept it, knowing the evil behind what this king had done, it would be like, you're accepting blood money. You know you're accepting this reward, but upon the basis of this, you know what this king had done wrong. God was about to reveal to him that this king had done wrong. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar's offering, it wasn't based on any wrong deed of such that he did. It was a matter of a dream, an interpretation of a dream and such like, So pretty much close to what Ian just backed up there.
Okay. Right. Thanks for the comments, guys.
The other
Now,
thing, Brother David, is that the reward wasn't really being dangled before these people in Nebuchadnezzar's time. It was a matter of Nebuchadnezzar needed the answer, and if you don't give him the answer, you're going to die. That's what was going to happen. So Daniel, in seeking God for the answer, was really to abate persons being killed for not knowing the answer.
yeah, it was to save lives, but Nebuchadnezzar did make Daniel second ruler in the kingdom, and Daniel didn't refuse it. But I don't even know if he gave Daniel the choice. It just says he made him the ruler, and as I said, I don't think Daniel had any reason to reject the position. It was not even so much a position of privilege as it was a position of responsibility. He wanted wise people helping to govern his kingdom. So he gave Daniel, he says, look, you're the wisest man in my kingdom. I want you here with me. So he was not looking at it as a promotion as much as he was looking at it as getting somebody to help me to govern this place. So, in the case of Belshazzar, he was dangling it as a bribe, almost like a bribe. So Daniel says, no, I don't want this. So as we all pointed out, there are several reasons. I'm sure there's not just one reason. So appreciate the comments. So the first thing Daniel does now is he rehearses what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, because as we can see, this is relevant to what is happening. So Daniel says, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, majesty, glory, and honor. God gave it to him. And he goes on to say, and for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he slew. Whom he would, he kept alive. And whom he would, he set up, and whom he would, he put down. It shows how completely God gave Nebuchadnezzar dominion over the entire planet. He had the power of life and death over men. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his earthly kingdom, and they took his glory from him. He's rehearsing what Belshazzar knows, and he's showing Belshazzar that the God of heaven is the one who put up his father, and the God of heaven is the one who took him down. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. This was Nebuchadnezzar's history, and Daniel is rehearsing it to Belshazzar. And this is his point. This is his point. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart. This is the critical point. Though thou knewest all this. So Daniel is not telling Belshazzar something new. When he went there to take out the vessels from the house of God, there's nothing in drinking from those vessels. When the showbread was for the priests alone. When David was fleeing from Saul, they gave him the showbread and he ate it and nothing happened to him. The ark was to be touched by the priests alone. Moses could handle it and nothing happened to him, but nobody else could. It's not the thing that you do. The Philistines handled the ark and they didn't drop dead. It's not the thing that you do. It's the motive why you do it. That is the important thing when you are dealing with God. It's the motive why you do it. One person can do something and it's absolutely no problem, and somebody else can do it and it's great blasphemy. It's that the king took out these vessels. It was not the vessels that were the issue. It was what he was saying about the God of heaven. He was flying in the face of God and he was saying, I neither respect nor rate you. I don't think you are important, and I'm showing how little you are by what I'm doing. It was barefaced defiance of the God that he had known to be the God above gods. This is why this hand came and the sentence came. Now, it turns out that this course had been forthcoming for a while. It wasn't just one night's activity, but it was like the climax. You could tell that Babylon was on the course for destruction because Cyrus and Darius had come against Babylon and they were camped outside the walls. And this had happened before. It was like with Judah and Israel. They were not overthrown in one day. They had a consistent course of rejection of God, of defiance of God, until God says they reached a place where there was no remedy. This was where Babylon and Belshazzar were. And the climaxing, barefaced blasphemy was when they took out the vessels from the house of God and they began to drink from these vessels. And I'll tell you something. When you look at the book of Daniel and you see how strikingly it parallels the events of the last day, I can well believe that in spiritual Babylon, there is to be an equivalent event or events where the barefaced blasphemy against God that we see prevailing in the world today will reach a place. It will come to a place where God will, where where grace, probation, the mercy of God closes forever against this institution, and it will be the end of this institution. So I'm saying there probably will be a corresponding event. I'm not going to discuss what that might be, not right now, because it's something we probably would need to take time to examine to see what it might be. But I'm just saying that I think there probably will be a corresponding event, because Daniel, the book of Daniel is like this. It's a pattern of the end. So there very probably will be a repeat of this in some way. So Daniel says, you knew all this, that's the point, but have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and of gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. You can tell that Daniel is grieved. You can tell that he's grieved, and I can feel his grief, because he doesn't just say, you have defied the God of heaven and you have not glorified him. Look here, he's rubbing it in. The God in whose hand is your breath, the God who has your breath in his hand, and all your ways are his, you have not glorified him. This is what you say when you want to rub it into somebody, how wicked and barefaced and blasphemous they have been. You let them understand just how much they are obligated to this person, just how much they depend on this person, and you fly in his face, you turn against him. So Daniel is making sure that this man understands the magnitude of his barefacedness, just in case you didn't get it, Belshazzar. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Now, let me back down a little bit from something I said a little earlier on. A little earlier on, I had said that probably this was a language that was not known, but in reading comments on this, I see where they have given interpretations to these words, which means that they probably are words that were known. Many means numbered. Tekel means weighed. And Perez means divided. So what the message says, numbered, weighed, divided. That's what the word said. But even if you see those three words on the wall, numbered, weighed, divided, what do they mean? Probably I'm rethinking, and I'm thinking that that is probably where the mystery was. They could read the words, but they could not tell what they meant. And it took Daniel now to interpret what those three words meant: numbered, weighed, divided. Because if you just see those three words, you still don't know what it means. So Daniel came in and he filled in the gaps, and he says, number one, number. God has numbered your kingdom and he has brought it to an end. Weighed. You are weighed in the balances and you are found wanting. Divided. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Now, let me pause a little bit. All right, let me come back to this. I'll come back to this. Let me just finish the chapter, then I'll come back to these three verses. It says, Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and they put a chain of gold about his neck, and they made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. I suppose Daniel is just playing along with them, because he has already said, I don't want this. But you know, they say, come, bring the robe and put on him. So he just submits. They said, they put him on a place, and they make a proclamation, and they put something on his head, and they have a little ceremony, and they say he's to be the third ruler in the kingdom. Everybody is to obey him, and Daniel is there saying, oh but he's playing along. All right, he knows that this is pointless and meaningless, but he goes along with it. And it says, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old, 62 years old. I like there's a little poem that I read in the book Daniel and the Revelation by Uriah Smith that sticks in my mind about this event. It says, that night they slew him on his father's throne, the deed unnoticed and the hand unknown. Crownless and scepterless, Belshazzar lay, a robe of purple round a form of clay. The vanity and the folly of human greatness. That's it. A robe of purple around a form of clay. So all the glorification and the exaltation that night, it ended just like that, in the snap of a finger, because that night they forgot to close the gates in the walls that surrounded the river. They forgot to close the gates. That night they forgot to close the gates. And why did they forget? Probably because they were having this great feast, whether it was a feast of Tammuz or whatever it was. They were having this great feast and everybody was drunk, and they forgot, or they ignored, or they were too drunk to care that their greatest enemies were camped at their gate. Because of course,
David,
yeah, Wayne, I soon allowed you unmute, but you make a lot of noise when
just
you
on that
unmute.
point before you left, I didn't want to go too far from that point. That's why I was just stitching it with that point.
All right, go
Nothing
ahead.
long. I was just thinking, in a time of peace and safety, then sudden destruction.
Yes, absolutely. Um, the thing is, even if the gates of the city were closed, were open, you still had a second backup because the river flowed. It was the huge river Euphrates that flowed. You could hardly believe that there was any way of traveling through the riverbed and bringing a whole army, because they would have to swim in the river, and it was a whole army, thousands of them, and they had to carry their armor and their swords. So the odds are, even if the gates were left open, nobody could get inside. So, you know, you could almost understand if they were a little careless and they got drunk and they never worried themselves too much. But this is the thing, because that very night, Cyrus and Darius hatched a plan that they would actually dam up the river Euphrates. You have an army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Everybody bring one stone. Everybody bring a rock, and everybody brought a rock and threw it into the river. And they did that. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and they dammed the river. For that night, the river was turned into a different course, and the river went right down till there was no river, and they marched in through the riverbed. And as a matter of fact, let me see if I can find this verse. There's a verse in Isaiah that prophesies, Isaiah 45 and verse 1. Look on the right panel here. This was about 100 years before Cyrus was born. Isaiah the prophet made this prophecy. Thus said the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. Now, the interesting thing is where he says, I will loose the loins of kings. Interesting that that very night Belshazzar's loins were loosed and his knees were smiting. To open before him the two-leaved gates, the gates that were actually barring the river bed. They opened like this. They opened like this. Two-leaf gates. There were two sides, and you open the two sides. It was two-leaf gates. You know, some gates would be one gate that goes down, and you like you bring it up like this. It goes down into the ground. Or it could be one gate that opens this way. But the gates over the river were actually two-leaf gates. And God made this prophecy through Isaiah 100 years before Cyrus was born, that the two-leaved gates would not be shut. And as a matter of fact, I understand that many years later, years later, Daniel actually, I'm not sure where this information comes from, but I'm told that this prophecy was shared with Cyrus, And it is one of the reasons why he actually gave the decree that the Jews should go back to their land, because his name was called in the Jewish prophecy 100 years before he was born. And it was predicted there exactly how he would conquer Babylon. So this, I understand, is one of the reasons why Cyrus was so willing to make the decree that the Jews should go back to Palestine. Now, it does say here in verse 31 that Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. But remember, it was a coalition of two nations. It was the Medes and the Persians, two different nations. They came together. But I understand that Darius the Mede was the uncle of Cyrus the Persian. So out of deference to his uncle, Cyrus was the greater king. But out of respect for his uncle, Cyrus allowed Darius to become king for the first part until Darius died. Then Cyrus became king. So this is why it says Darius the Mede took the kingdom, because he was the older man of the two kings that conquered Babylon. So I won't neglect to mention either that in Revelation it talks about, when it talks about the destruction of Babylon, it says the river Euphrates is dried up to make way for the kings from the east. You have the same thing happening again, but this time it's not physical Babylon, it's spiritual Babylon. And you have the great river Euphrates again being dried up. And again, you have the kings of the east. So you say, who are the kings of the east? The king of the east was Cyrus. Cyrus is a type of Jesus Christ. At the time of the coming of Jesus, before Jesus arrives, the support of Babylon, the river Euphrates, is going to be dried up. And what this means is that the people that support Babylon are going to turn against Babylon. The support for Babylon will be dried up. It's one of the 7 last plagues. And I think it will be at the same time that the 10 horns will turn against Babylon, eat her flesh, make her naked, and burn her with fire. So all the prophecies come together in a cohesive way. And you see that all of these things are in the book of Daniel. They are types and representations. They are stories that have a greater meaning down at the end. Now let me go back to this. Mene, Tekel, and Perez. When we were doing the series, the study on Revelation, we mentioned this, but I want to repeat it because I think it's important enough to repeat. One of the things that we see brought out in this story of Belshazzar, it's a very important principle, and I don't think you can find it anywhere else in the Bible. It is the principle that before God overthrows a kingdom, if you look at what happens here, before God overthrows a kingdom, he first of all numbers the kingdom, he weighs the kingdom. Now you might say, where is the evidence of this? You don't find this in detail anywhere else in the Bible. But you find it here in Daniel 5, and you find a suggestion of it in Daniel 7. If you go to Daniel 7, you see 4 kingdoms that are overthrown, one behind the other. Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then the great 5th kingdom, the kingdom that is to last forever. 5 kingdoms. And you say, why is it that these kingdoms are overthrown, but the last kingdom is not overthrown? The reason is because God has weighed it in the balances. God has numbered the kingdom. Before God makes a decision about any kingdom, before heaven makes a decision, you have to examine it first. You have to number the kingdom. You have to weigh it in the balances. Jesus' kingdom will last forever because it is weighed in the balances. And you find this examination of the kingdom of Christ in the book of Revelation. That is what we went through as we studied the prophecy of Revelation. The kingdom of Jesus is also to be examined. When you find it here in Babylon, it's just an expression of what is happening all the time. What does it mean when it says God has numbered your kingdom? A number is a value that you give to something. All right? And it's you know, it is said that the number of the beast is 666. The number system is in the Bible all over. The number of God is 7. A number is a value that is assigned to something. Even when you go to school, you get a number, 9 out of 10, 1 out of 10. It's an evaluation of your performance. Numbers are used generally, to evaluate performance. How much do you give this person? I give you a 9 out of 10. I give you a 5 out of 10. Numbers are an evaluation system. So when God says God has numbered your kingdom, what it is saying is that God has evaluated your kingdom. God has examined your kingdom, and he has put a value to it. If you were to ask God, what number did you give Babylon? He might have said 1 out of 10 or 0 out of 10. And he goes on to further highlight what he has done by saying, you are weighed in the balances. I have measured you. The balances are like a scale. It's another evaluation method. You put 5 pounds in Jamaica. It doesn't happen so much nowadays, but in country shops, they still do it. I mean, I think when you go to the shop, you buy 2 pounds of flour. They put in the scoop, they weigh it out, and they put it on the scale. You buy everything that, I know that in more developed countries, everything is pre-packaged and put down, and you just go and pick up something of the weight you want. But in the country shops, they still weigh everything. You go and buy half pound of this or 2 pounds of that, and they put it on the scale. Every little shopkeeper has a scale there. It's a way of evaluating something. And God says to Babylon, I have put you on the scale. I put you on the 2 scales, and you don't measure up. You're too light. You're not holding up at the level where you should be. And so the final sentence, your kingdom has been taken away, it has been divided, and it is given to the Medes and the Persians. So I would say, if God does not do this to all kingdoms, then he was unfair to Babylon. But we can understand that what he did to Babylon, he did to Medo-Persia. What he did to Medo-Persia, he did to Greece, he did to Rome. And he will also do to the final kingdom, the kingdom of Christ. And this is the only kingdom that when it is measured, when it is numbered, it is 10 out of 10. Or maybe you would say 7. And when it is weighed in the balances, it is equal. It measures up to the standard. And that is why the Bible says of this kingdom, his kingdom is from everlasting to everlasting, and his dominion that which shall not be taken away, because his kingdom measures up. It will never be taken away. So that is just the final word I want to say. Yes, brother Sean. Is that Sean? Go ahead.
Yeah, the 2 words, you first and Harris. Why the 2 different usages there?
It's because it's a different. If you ever did Latin or Spanish for that matter, you know that when you come to verbs and nouns, you can conjugate verbs and you can decline nouns. And what it means is that every word has maybe 3 or 4, sometimes 6 different ways that it can be said. It's not the same way in English. English is a strange language in this respect, so it doesn't come out clearly in English. Some words in English, like you would say, all right, take Patwa, for example. If it's one of you, in Patwa, you say you. If it's more than one, what you say?
Some people say use, but we don't in English.
Right, but in Patwa, I'm asking Brother Sean because he will know. Give me the word, Sean.
Go again. You're saying you for one person and
In Patwa, you is one, and if it's more than one, what you say?
uno.
That's right.
Uno.
Okay. Yeah, if you never
Uno.
gave me that, I would be disappointed, Sean. Yeah, uno. You say uno. It's the same word, but it's a different form of the word. It's the same thing here. Like Jesus. Jesus. Yeah, just a second. Just a second, Nikki. Just a second. It's like the word Jesus. It's Yeshua in Hebrew, but when it went to Greek, it was Yeshua. But if you say Jesus, it's Yeshua. But if you say if it's the second person or the third person, the form changes. It becomes Yesu, or it could even be Yesuan. Same word, but a different ending based on what is being said about the person. So this is why you have Upharsin and Peres. It's the same word, but it's a different form of the word. Go ahead, Nikki. Janique,
I was just going to give an example
go
in
ahead.
English since we were struggling.
You can go ahead. She's a linguist. So she
I
should be.
am, you are, it's the same verb to be, but it changed form based on who we are talking about.
Thank you, Nikki. That's a good example. And are. It's the same word, but it sounds completely different. One is singular, one is plural. So this is why when you're looking for words in Strong's dictionary, you can't use it as a final word, because many times you'll see a word in the Bible and it's another form of the word. And when you go to Strong's, it just gives you the basic meaning of that word. But if you look at the Bible, you'll find other forms. If you look at an interlinear translation, you'll see different forms of the word that you might not even recognize, yet it's the same word. So if you want to get the literal translation of what is being said, you really need something like an interlinear translation. If you don't read the language itself, you need an interlinear translation to actually give you the different forms of the word. You see a strange looking word. When you look at it in the Strongs, it tells you the basic word and what it means. So, yes, Sister Di, go ahead. And we're going to stop here.
Okay, this is something different. I always thought when I read this story of Belshazzar that he would have been a boy when what happened with his grandfather happened. And when his grandfather was converted and declared that everybody had to worship Daniel's God, it's kind of hard to make people in Babylon everybody worship. I don't know how he could have done it. He decreed it, but when somebody's in their home, it's like how they're going to do it in these last days. But so when they were in their homes, they did whatever they wanted. So when the boy goes to visit his grandfather's worshiping the true God, and he's like any grandfather. He's telling his grandson, and the grandson is worshiping with him. He's telling him his experiences. He's sharing with him when he's at grandpa's house. And maybe when he goes home, his parents are doing similar, but maybe not totally. And because they respect their father. And so he gets a little bit of this because he's at his grandpa's house. And so he grows up under the influence of his parents. And of course, a lot of that, like most kids, even if he had the full influence, if he's not converted, then it doesn't matter to him and he loses it. So I always thought about that story of when Daniel reprimands him so with such passion, because he's probably seen him there at the king's palace. He's seen the little boy. He knows him growing up, and he knows the influence that his grandfather has shared with him. And now he's turned out like this. So the passion is because he's angry for God, jealous for God, but he's also disappointed because of knowing the background of the boy turning out this blasphemous. That's where I always thought about that.
Probably very likely. Probably very likely. Thanks, Sister Di. All right, I'm going to close and stop the recording. My sister Marie asked me wanted me to comment a little bit about the mark of the beast, and she's going to ask some questions. So after we close the recording and we have our closing prayer, then we're going to have a little bit more of a discussion.